It's a pretty well-known fact that this movie was the final production that both Mel Blanc and George O'Hanlon were ever involved with. O'Hanlon in particular was actually so weak that he couldn't even see anymore, mostly due to a stroke that he suffered from a couple of years earlier, and pretty much had to have all the lines read to him by someone else. And Mel Blanc had been bedstricken for years. In fact, there are certain points in the film where you can tell that Mel Blanc and George O'Hanlon had a voiceover double to finish off the remaining lines. Can you guess which spots?
Get me off this crazy thing! And now, with your family beside you, you face a new challenge.
Are you up to it, Jetson?
Yes, sir, Mr. Spacely.
It's going to be a lot of work.
Not too much for me, sir.
Good. Then roll up your sleeves. You'll be working overtime.
Mr. Spacely, you can't stand in the way of George Jetson.
Elroy's voice actor, Doss Butler, died before production even started, and he was replaced by Patrick Zimmerman. That's right, Elroy in this movie was voiced by none other than Revolver Ocelot himself.
Special Operations Foxhound. Revolver Ocelot.
And here's the real fucked up part. Janet Waldo had already recorded all of her dialogue for Judy before Universal decided to appeal to the teen pop fans by bringing Tiffany in just to help promote the film to a younger audience. Who is Tiffany, you ask? Well, for some of you youngins in the audience, in the mid-'80s she was sort of what you'd call a major pop icon. The likes of, well, I'm not quite sure what you kids are into these days, but she was probably the equivalent of Britney Spears at the time. You may also know her as that chick from Mega Piranha. She had originally been signed on to do the soundtrack for this movie, but since the producers felt they needed to sell more records, they just decided to have her voice Judy full-time instead, leaving Janet Waldo completely out in the rain. Needless to say, the two of them have gone under a sort of feud in the decades ever since.
Her life is over.
My life is over!
She just needs to get used to the idea.
We then cut to the next morning where we see the Jetsons leaving Earth on their way to the asteroid. But we can't just simply have them move from one spot to the next. We need to have them dancing along to some pop song in the background, because damn it, we got a soundtrack to sell. We then get a close view of the asteroid, and they start pointing out the details of every location on said asteroid to provide enough character establishment for the rest of the film.
Look, Judy, it's got a shopping mall. A mall? Oh, nothing matters without Cosmo.
Oh good, Elroy seems to share the same sentiment with the audience. And just to show off even more of the CG graphics that this film loves to showcase, the Jetsons then swirl around in almost every corner they can find in order to justify all these camera shots. And as soon as they exhausted their CG time, they felt the need to zoom into the hotel that the Jetsons are going to stay in for the remainder of the film.
It's very nice, George.
Oh, brother.
Oh.
Where's my room?
Where's the kitchen? Where's the phone? I've got to call Francie and find out what I'm missing.
Francie? You mean that horny friend of hers from earlier?
I wonder if this thing works up here.
It's at this point you start noticing that the majority of things that happen in this film were primarily used as filler pieces.
Padding, 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 padding. Hey look, a wall! That's different!
And then we meet the secondary characters of the film, which will always simply be known as the Twos. Why is that? Because apparently every single one of them ends in 2.
See you guys. Gotta check this place out.
I just found out Doris told Susie and Susie told Mary and Mary told...
Mandy and Mandy told Clover and Clover told Alex and Alex told Sammy and Sammy told Jerry and Jerry told...
Francie and Francie told me. Helen took my day with Cosmo. I'll never be happy again. Never, 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 never. I hate this place.
What a drama queen. Relatively speaking.
So after the necessary exposition dump, we need to find some way to calm Judy down. So, like most teenage girls, all you gotta do is mention the mall.
Judy, how'd you like to go shopping at the mall tomorrow?
I can't. What time does it open?
See? Told you.
I served dinner.
So after God knows how many hours later, Elroy finally comes back with this little blue furry thing. We then see its parents coming along the doorway just in the nick of time for more exposition.
We're the Furbelows. Birdie Furbelow, Gertie Furbelow.
How'd you do?
And that's our little Fergie. She's a girl.
Fergalicious definition, make them boys go loco.
The dad Furbelow is voiced by none other than Brad Garrett, who most of you probably know as the brother Rob from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Hey, Ma, I have nothing to eat over there. You said you were making me dinner.
I don't cook anymore.
And apparently he has a thing for funky music, such as this.
Hope you like Furbelow music, George.
What is Furbelow music?
You know.
Speaking of which, it's time for a dance-off. As we're boogieing down, we'll cut to commercial break. Whoosh! Hey there, guys. Didn't realize we were back from commercial break.
Weird, huh?
I wonder what they're saying about us.
What they're saying about you, that they just left, and what do you think they're going to start spreading rumors or something? What else do you think they're going to say about you?
Jane, you ignorant slut.
And as they turn in for the night, which I can only assume is the logical step up from the clapper. Yeah, anyone remember those things?
The clapper.
We're then introduced to another element that Hanna-Barbera is known best for. Use of stock footage. Seriously, this is all the exact same footage we saw at the beginning of the movie, showing what happens in the Ore asteroid every night. I guess just to show the audience that, yep, it's still happening. The next morning, we get to see how morning routines are on the asteroid, which makes me wonder if this place is rigged with brain scanners that allow them to customize the hotel any way the customer feels most comfortable with. Kind of creepy in hindsight, or in this case, foresight. And I guess everyone decided to get on their video phones to say bye to him, including Astro, who manages to break physics once again to lick him right in the face from the video phone.
To the office, Mac.
George then meets his only other employee in the plant, Rudy 2, who we'd seen earlier. But apparently they decided to wait until they were on the crane before they introduced themselves. Seriously, filmmaking 101. They are the only two employees due to the plant being fully automated. Rudy 2 then decides to explain to George how the plant works by a rap song. And here's one particular lyric that's always bothered me for years.
Take the forward ore sprocket packets from the packet brackets and we rock it.
Wait, what?
Take the forward ore sprocket packets from the packet brackets.
Sorry, could you play that over again?
Take the forward ore sprocket packets from the packet brackets.
With the only thing required is a push of a button.
That's your job, George.
Yeah, you notice how they keep bringing up the theme of pushing buttons?
But I'm not pushing that button. But the orbiting Ore asteroid can't work without someone to push the start button. Someone who can push a button. I push the button that gets things started. Let's push the stupid button.
It's almost like it's trying to build up to something. After we cut to a useless scene with Mr. Spacely, we then cut over to the mall center of the Ore asteroid. It's in this scene we get to see the entire anachronistic stew that this movie sets itself in from the late 80s and early 90s, according to the future. It's also in this scene where we get to hear Judy sing the Oscar bait song, or at the very least, this film's equivalent to an Oscar bait song. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this song is actually pretty decent, and it really shows Tiffany's maturing as a performance artist, making the transition from a teen pop idol to a more adult contemporary singer. But the way it's used here is for a girl who's heartbroken that she's been cheated on by some douchebag rock star. I mean, it kind of makes you want to bring out the world's smallest violin to play. But before the first day she spends her inevitable life as a spinster with 20 cats, she bumps into this guy named Apollo Blue.
You
Dummy?
Oh my gosh, it's 2 minutes to 12. I've gotta go.
Don't tell me you turn into a pumpkin. See you tomorrow, pumpkin?
What? Pumpkin? Pumpkin what? What? Pumpkin what? And, like most teenage girls, she is instantly over her previous crush. We then cut to Elroy's situation in his new Spaceball team position, where he then has to put his revolver ocelot skills to the ultimate test.
Going down. Going in.
No way, Elroy.
Ooh, he just Bill Russell 2000 that shot. We then cut back to Spacely Sprocket's main headquarters on Earth, where Mr. Spacely is about to announce the big day where they sell their 1 millionth Sprocket.
Spacely Sprocket. Tomorrow, the universe.
Gee, movie, very subtle. I'm wondering what kind of agenda this film has exactly. And as things go into operation, it goes relatively smoothly. But just as they're about to reach their big goal, chaos strikes. And just to add a little extra tension to the scene, they have Teddy 2 get knocked out by some of the Sprockets, and Elroy has to jump in to try and save him. Wait, what the hell are you so happy about, Judy? Your little brother is there risking his life, and all you can think about is getting some blue Dabba D? Of course, then Rudy 2 manages to save them both just in time, and Mr. Spacely finally decides to make a reaction to everything that's been going on for the past minute. George tries to shut down the plant, but with his fingers in dilemma, he decides to be on the nose of the subject. And then we cut to later that night, where it seems all tension between Elroy and Teddy 2 had officially dissolved, and they are now friends. Rudy 2 then tries to convince George that he should probably leave for the sake of his own safety, but due to his stubbornness of trying to keep his job, he decides to stay. We then cut to later that night when we get even more stock footage. Yeah, they're really trying to get a lot of mileage out of these clips. And it's not just the clips either. They also reuse dialogue. And I don't just mean they repeat the lines over and over again. They use the exact same audio clips.
My gosh, that felt good. Right from you, yours. Right from you, yours.
George then decides to come in early the next morning to try and gain control over the situation. But it doesn't take long for the chaos to start up once again. Only this time, George gets even more up close and personal with it, as he ends up getting sucked into the machine and winds up getting boxed in at every corner. It's here that Mr. Spacely has officially reached the end of his patience and decides to go to the asteroid himself. But, being the cheap ass he is, he decides to go on the Ghetto spaceship.
May I get you anything?
Don't give those guys any more donuts.
Oh, but if they did that, we'd have to hear the hilariously racist accents the aliens would clearly be given.